If you've watched my other videos on this 240D behind me, you know I'm getting it ready for a 3,000 mile cross-country road trip. And in this video, I just want to stress the importance of doing an inspection and possibly some maintenance before you buy one of these cars on eBay, fly cross-country, and drive it home. Now, I know some of you think, oh, no problem, these cars go a million miles, you know, I'm not going to have any problem. Maybe some of you have done that and haven't had any problem. But if you want a pleasurable, worry-free, and stress-free trip, I highly recommend that you complete what I'm going to call my 30-point inspection for a cross-country diesel road trip, okay? Now, there's probably more than 30 items, but these 30 items that I'm going to share with you over the next series of videos on this subject of prepping a car for a long, we're talking long cross-country, 1,000 to 3,000 mile trip. You know, we're going to go over things that I have found can cause the most grief if they become a problem on the open road. So you can see here on the table, this is all the things I've changed over the last week on this 240D. Now, I'm not going to go over all of these in this video, but in the subsequent videos, we'll narrow down on some of these items. They're all part of this 30-point checklist, okay? And this is only related to the suspension and running gear. I haven't gotten into the engine yet to do the things that I want to do before I have the car ready. But, you know, you can say, well, Kent, so what? You don't need to replace shock absorbers if you're going cross-country. Well, once again, that's not going to cause a breakdown. You get one of these old diesels with bad shocks and you're going down the road. Think of this, for 40-some hours of boing, boing, boing. So that's your call, okay? Now, I did find, by the way, two things which I consider dangerous. You know, there's other things like tie rod links. Maybe if you got a little slop in the steering, that's not going to cause a catastrophic failure unless it's excessive slop and you've got, you know, worn parts. But you can imagine, you know, 40 hours or 40, 50 hours of driving and you're going like this the whole time. Is that a lot of fun? I don't consider that a lot of fun. So once again, some of these things, you know, you don't have to do. But you're probably going to have to do them anyway after you get the car. At least you want to inspect the car or have someone inspect it and give them this list and say, can you check these 30 items? Because these are the things that are going to leave you stranded or cause a lot of grief and unhappiness. Take the joy out of these long cross-country trips. I had one guy fly all the way from the East Coast here to drive a 240D all the way back, and he wanted to do it for the adventure. Now, he didn't care if he had a breakdown because he said, well, I'll just, you know, I'm not in a hurry, I'm retired. But I went ahead and did a whole bunch of stuff on the car that I hadn't planned to do because I sold the car for a reasonable price, knowing it needed some work, because I just didn't want to have him go through the problem of having a flat tire. You know, the tires were old. You don't want to take off on a long cross-country trip with old tires that show cracking in the tread. So I changed the tires and I went and fixed a bunch of other stuff, voltage regulator, you know, these things that can cause you to get stuck. And when you get stuck in these remote locations, it's not always easy to get parts or to even get the car repaired. So what I'm doing with this is trying to get it to where it has its best chance of making a 3,000 mile road trip. And there's no guarantee. I could miss something or something could happen. The engine could just blow up, because that's the nature with 30-plus-year-old cars. But in this case, you know, I decided to go ahead and replace all these items. If you do this yourself, it's not that expensive. If you have to take it to a shop to have all this stuff replaced, you don't want to know the price, okay? But over this series of videos, I'll list this 30-point inspection in the description below this video, and then over the next videos that I do in this series, we'll narrow down on each one and I'll show you some examples. And then I'll show you the parts, kits, video instructions, or manuals that I have so that you can replace these yourself. For instance, here's a simple one. That's a steering shock. And when the steering shock is shot, you're going to get a lot of vibration in your steering when you hit ruts or at high speed. So once again, that's not going to leave you stranded, but it's certainly going to make it more pleasurable if you're going on a long trip. Sometimes you're going on a long trip because you already own the car and you're getting it ready. It may not be that you're flying to some distant location to drive it back, but you know, I've probably purchased a half a dozen cars on eBay, and most of the time I have them delivered by truck, because you don't know what you're getting, in spite of what the seller may say. And he may not be trying to deceive you, he may just not know. The only car that I decided to drive cross country was a 93 300D 2.5 of reasonably low mileage, about 120,000 miles. And I had a major problem. It had a fuel hose at the tank leaking, and I was dumping fuel all over the freeway, and I didn't know it. You know, I kept thinking, man, I'm not getting very good mileage with this car. Sure enough, there it was. I got underneath the car and saw this hose leaking diesel fuel, and I don't know how many gallons I dumped on the road. But that wasn't fun to fix in a remote location without the tools and parts you need. So just a word of the wise, your car, your trip, but it might be a good idea. Here's a quick overview of what I did to the front end. I didn't have to change the caliper, the rotor, or the pads because they were in good condition. I did pull the cap off and repack the outer wheel bearing, check that. I went ahead and changed the idler arm bushings here, all the tie rods, that center link, put on new shocks, new flexible brake hose, new upper control arms and bushings, and now I'm ready to install the front tires and check the alignment. I can check toe in and toe out with a special tool I have here in the shop. So I've pretty much wrapped up the suspension on this. You know, I also had to replace the axles because the axle boots were torn. You can see are badly torn, and all these other parts were either loose or worn out. So the two items that I consider a dangerous situation, number one, were the rear calipers were dragging. Literally frozen pistons. You do not, and I'm going to repeat, you do not want to go on a long road trip, even a short road trip of a couple hundred miles, until you've determined that your brake calipers are working properly. Because I've had a car catch on fire due to dragging brakes. It'll heat the grease up and actually get the grease so hot in and around the suspension parts that you'll have a fire, and you'll also just smoke the tires. One time I had a trailer that the brakes locked up on. It got so hot it blew the tire. You can actually blow a tire from having a caliper locked up and overheating the rotors in the rear hub. So this was one thing that had to get fixed. And of course, the flexible brake hoses came with it, new brake fluid. The other thing were these upper control arms. I've seen pictures of these break, and when it does, your whole front end collapses. Now, it hasn't happened to me, but these joints are totally shot. The bushings on this end were just falling apart. I'm going to show this a little bit more in a later video, but that was something that really needed to be changed, because you would not only have a front end that was moving all over the place as you went down the freeway, but these parts were so badly worn, and even one of these ball sockets was broken off. And guess what happens at high speed? You can imagine that is considered dangerous. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about these individually. I'll show you examples. I'll refer to the list. But I would say in another 2 weeks or so, we'll probably have this 240D done. We will have gone through all 30 points, and this baby will be ready to hit the road. This is just going to be a very small point, but it's a great example why you don't want to go buy an old Mercedes and just jump in it and drive it cross country without checking a few things over, including looking under the car and checking for fluid leaks. Now, this 240D has been sitting here on the lift, and it's got this nice puddle of engine oil. So this needs to be attended to. I've seen this so often that I just have to show you this on this 240D. Look at the oil drain plug. It's just almost rounded off. Somebody's put it on with vice grips or pliers. But it has a copper washer, and that copper washer is leaking. You can see the drips underneath the pan. You need to look above the pan to make sure there's no oil coming down from above. Here you can clearly see above that lower pan that there's no wetness, no oil coming down from above. So we know for sure that it's going to be this pan plug. And you might be thinking, well, do I have to drain my oil to change the pan plug and that copper washer? No, I've got Gerson here. He's convinced he can do it without even losing as much as a quarter of a cup of oil. You have to have the other plug ready. This is a two-handed operation by Gerson. He's an expert at this. Maybe a dozen times you've had to do this. Oh, okay. See, you're going to plug it with your left-hand finger. That is if you're right-handed. You're going to get the other plug ready with the washer all the way on, and you're going to get it lined up. Okay, go. Is it in?
Yeah.
Okay. Good job, Gerson.